Hey everyone, and welcome back to our review of the lectures by Benjamin Graham, which you can find at the Columbia Business School website. Today we're going to be going over lecture 9. We've already gone over the past 8 lectures, and you don't have to watch any of those. That's okay. I'll make sure that if you're watching this for the first time, you won't need to watch those. But in case you're interested, in the description I have a link to a playlist that includes a review of the other 8, as well as any resources or corrections that need to be made. But we're just going to jump right in today. So this lecture 9 doesn't have a title, so I'm going to give it one. It's going to be Graham versus Buffett and dividends. So let's just jump right in. First, Ben Graham starts by saying, now we turn to the New Amsterdam Casualty case, which is interesting for a couple different set of reasons. As I pointed out in the previous lecture, here you have a very large discounted price from breakup value, which is also called liquidation or book value in more modern terms. But instead of having an unprofitable company, you have one which, over the years, has shown very good results indeed. Instead of having the stockholder suffering from what might be called a certain waste of assets, in the sense of a business which is carried on for years on a relatively losing basis, you have the exact opposite. The stockholder is suffering from an undue desire by management to gather together and retain all the assets possible and to give out as little as they decently can to the stockholders. I think the contrast in the two cases is very extraordinary, and it deserves some careful thinking on your side, for it shows that the stockholders' interests are affected by developments and policies of a very diverse nature, and that a stockholder can suffer from failure to pay out earnings when they are realized nearly as much as he suffers from failure to realize earnings. What Ben Graham is saying here is in most cases, when you have a company that's selling below book value, it's because they've been on a losing tear. Like every time, every year, when you look at the reported earnings, they're losing money. But this is a case where they're making money, but is still not giving shareholders as much value as they could because instead of paying out any kind of earnings that they make to the shareholders, they're retaining it. And we'll explain why Ben Graham doesn't think that's appropriate. So Ben Graham wants New Amsterdam to pay out dividends or to pay out their realized earnings. Now, that will be vigorously denied by corporate managements who insist that as long as the money is made and is retained in the treasury, the stockholder does not possibly suffer and he can only gain. I think you gentlemen are better qualified than anyone else to be the judge of that very question. Is it true that the outside stockholder invariably benefits from the retention of earnings in the business, as distinct from payments of a fair return on the value of his equity in the form of dividends? I believe that Wall Street experience shows clearly that the best treatment for stockholders is a payment to them of fair and reasonable dividends in relation to the company's earnings and in relation to true value of the security as measured by any ordinary test based on earnings power or assets. So right here, he's saying that he believes in this instance that a company should pay more dividends. However, Wall Street might argue that if they retain the earnings, as in they keep the money that they would pay out for dividends, that they can do something in the business that'll produce a better return than the shareholders will. So this is something that Warren Buffett's really known for. Warren Buffett is actually the mentor to Benjamin Graham because Warren Buffett hasn't paid a dividend since the first year he joined at Berkshire Hathaway. And I'd imagine that was probably out of his control. But from there, he hasn't paid one. And he said that even as he dies, he will have never paid a dividend with Berkshire Hathaway. And I believe him. So why is it that Warren Buffett, who studied under Benjamin Graham, and Benjamin Graham are arguing kind of on this point? And they're not actually arguing. They're actually saying the same thing, which is funny. And I'll explain as we end this lecture. But that's what Benjamin Graham says. He says in Wall Street right now, in his experience, they can't retain these earnings and produce a better return than the stockholder can. So Benjamin Graham says it's in our best interest to receive a dividend because in his eyes, he's seen Wall Street retain the earnings and then do something dumb with it or inefficient with it, I should say. And then they don't provide a better return. And there's actually a second factor, which we'll explain in just a second. Okay, so then he says, in my view, the New Amsterdam Casualty case is a very vivid example of how securities holders can suffer through failure to pay adequate dividends. This company, as I remarked 2 weeks ago, has been paying a $1 dividend, which is the same amount as paid by the other two companies, North River Company and American Equitable. Its average earnings have been very much higher, For the 5 years, 1941 and 1945, the earnings are shown to be averaged $4.33 after taxes, as against which their maximum dividend has been $1 per annum. So I made a little chart for these three companies to explain what Benjamin Graham is talking about here. You have the North American Casualty, you have North River, and you have American Equitable. Each one of these companies pays a dividend of $1. However, their last 5-year average earnings is $4.43 for North American Casualty, $1.12 for North River, and 9 cents for American Equitable. So here you have three cases of companies paying $1, but their earnings are vastly different. In Ben Graham's case, he probably believes, he doesn't say it in the lecture, that North River Company is justified in their $1, maybe a little too high. American Equitable probably shouldn't be paying a dividend, and North American Casualty should be paying higher than $1. Now, let's keep going because he still has more to say. If I scroll up here, he says, if the New Amsterdam company had been paying a dividend commensurate with its earnings and its assets, both, there is no doubt in my mind, but that I think it's supposed to say that the stockholders would have benefited in two major ways. First, they would have received an adequate return on their money, which is a thing of very great moment. Which is a thing of very great moment in the case of average stockholder. And secondly, they would have enjoyed a better market price for their stock. So, to prove that last part, he says you have a company, U.S. Fidelity and Guarantee, that's almost identical to New Amsterdam Casualty. I kept saying New American, it's New Amsterdam, I'm sorry. So they're almost identical with one difference. U.S. Fidelity pays out a dividend of $2 rather than $1. In the result, U.S. Fidelity sells at around $45, whereas New Amsterdam stock sold anywhere between 26 and 28. So you get about double the price for double the dividend. And this is something Ben Graham has talked about in previous lectures as well. Again, if you want to watch them, you can see them in the description. But let's continue. He then says, you may ask, what is the reason advanced by the management for failure to pay a more substantial dividend when it appears that the price of the stock and the stockholders' dividend return both suffer so much from the present policy? Ben Graham says, isn't it obvious? Why are people doing this? And he says, you will find if you talk to management on the subject that they will give you 3 reasons for the dividend policy. And if you've done similar missionary work over a period of time, the arguments will sound strangely familiar to you. So it seems to be the same 3 reasons that New Amsterdam Casualty gives you is the same 3 reasons that all companies give you for their dividend policy. So the first reason why they set it and don't set it enough is for a reason of conservatism. So they believe that it's best to be conservative, retain more money just in case anything bad happens. And the real question at issue is, can a company be too conservative? Would the stockholders be better off, for example, if they received no dividend at all rather than $1, which would be carrying the conservatism to its complete extreme? I believe that experience shows that conservatism of this kind can be carried to a point of seriously harming the stockholders' interest. So Ben Graham says, why $1? Why not 99 cents? Why not $1.01? Like, have you experimented or have you just stuck at $1 because this is a nice round number? He believes that you can be too extremely conservative, and that's what he believes. He's not saying they're extremely conservative, this New Amsterdam company, but he's saying they might be too conservative, and he's going to give you more reasons as to why he thinks that is in a second. But let's move on to the second reason. The second reason that you get from this company, and you'll get it from every other company in the same position, is that theirs is a very special business and has special hazards. Since every business is a special business, it seems to me that the argument more or less answers itself, that he finds this justification irrelevant. Every business is going to be special in its own way. You just have to kind of look at the average earnings in the past. Moving on, he says, even on a bad year like 1946, New Amsterdam Casualty Company appeared to earn on the order of $2.50 a share. Therefore, it could well have afforded a larger dividend than $1, even if you took the 1-year results alone. He doesn't believe that you should do that. He just says, even if you take a very bad resulting year, that you can still pay out, at least on average, more than $1 of earnings. So they are not doing the stockholders justice by being conservative, that they're being too conservative. I will point, it will be pointed out that some companies have been having difficulties in the insurance business in the last 2 years, and for that reason, it is desirable that conservatism should be followed. But Graham says, how does that hold any light? Because just because your neighbor's not doing well, or maybe the whole neighborhood isn't doing well, doesn't really matter to you as long as you are doing well. He says, don't look at it on an industry basis, but instead looking at on a business to business basis. And in this case, he still believes that a higher dividend is justified, and that argument is rather irrelevant. The third point is that stockholders do not understand the problems of the business as well as the management of the company. Therefore, it is little short of impertinence for the stockholders to suggest that they know better than the management what is the proper policy to follow in their interest. So this is a little bit of a, I guess, psychological, maybe emotional kind of dealing where the management believes that they know better. So even the stockholders are like, well, look at the numbers. We can justify a higher dividend. The management's like, well, we know the company better, and you aren't seeing everything that we're seeing, especially on a daily basis and stuff. However, Ben Graham says, I think you would all agree that the principle of stockholders' control over managements would be completely vitiated if you assumed the managements always knew what was the best thing to do and always acted in the stockholders' interest on every point. So what he's saying is stockholders definitely can know better than management in some places, and he believes that this case for dividends is one such example. I wrote "ha" here because this next part's kind of funny. He says, before we go any further, I just want to say in regard to New Amsterdam Company, two things. First, Ben Graham had a dispute with the management as to its proper dividend policy. I want to say that because you may believe that this presentation has been biased. I think it's funny that he's a professor at Columbia. He's gone over to this New Amsterdam Casualty company and said, hey, you should probably raise your dividend. And they gave him all these three reasons. He said, okay, I'm going to make a course about it, why you're wrong. I thought that was funny. But that's not exactly what he's doing, especially after we read the second point that he wants to make. And that is, very emphatically, is that the New Amsterdam Casualty Company is extremely well managed. So he's not bashing on them by any means. It would be funny if he was, but he is not. He's just providing a vivid example, and that's what he wants to emphasize. All right, so now back to the difference between Warren Buffett and Ben Graham here. And actually, there really is no difference. So in this time, in Benjamin Graham's eyes, every dollar retained in the business could not provide a better return than a dividend policy would provide. And Warren Buffett has been an exceptional example where every time he retained the money that he would have paid out for a dividend, he was able to make an acquisition or invest in a great business like Apple and provide a wonderful return for people. In Warren Buffett's eyes, you're giving him money in Berkshire Hathaway, and it's his responsibility to create a return for you. And so why would he give the money back? It would be like if I gave you $100 and said, go invest my money. And then you said, okay, but first, let me give you $1 back. In Warren Buffett's eyes, he says, why would I do that? He's kind of betting on himself to do a lot better. Now, apparently, in Ben Graham's eyes, that every time you gave the money to Warren Buffett, you would have a case, and not Warren Buffett per se, but just Warren Buffett in general, Wall Street experience. That character wasn't able to return necessary return. In fact, probably ended up being a company that suffered from losing money. So Ben Graham says, okay, you made your return. Now give it back to me. I'm a great investor. Let me go invest it. So I think it would have been different had Ben Graham been in the position of a company where if he had a business, and he did later on, and he made a return through his business, he, being the great investor he was, would want to turn a return. So it's the same concept, essentially putting the dollar into the place of its best use. So yeah, they're not that far apart, and that's the end of this lecture. So now I'm just going to jump over StreamYard, see if anybody had any questions, and I don't see anybody here. If you do have questions, feel free to leave them in the comment section, but that's it for this video. Thank you so much for watching, and until next time, at the very bitter end, lecture 10 coming soon.